welcome everybody. My name is Miguel. I am from Diversify. I'm the project manager of this program. And we're doing it together with Sam in the Job, who is another organization that runs mentorship programs. Thank you. Hi, everyone. We usually run these workshops together, but you might as well, all the people who are from Diversify are able to join the activities from Sam in the Job and so forth. So, give me 1 second. But yeah, so Øyvind, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'll start with the typical pandemic question. Can
Yeah.
everybody see my screen? It's supposed to say something like how to excel in job interviews. If someone cannot see my screen, let me know. So a little bit about me. My name is Øyvind, as you might be able to gauge. I am Norwegian. I was born and raised right outside of Oslo, but after school, I went straight out to study abroad, and I've been living abroad for about 12 years, working in international tech, mainly Google in Dublin, but also a little stint at Klarna, for example. I lived and worked in about 5 countries, or 5 countries so far. And throughout my career, I worked mainly in multinational teams. Like I said, I spent a lot of time at Google, where I was heavily involved in interviewing potential candidates for jobs at Google. I was a top interviewer. That doesn't mean I was the best interviewer. It just means I did a very, very large amount of interviews. I also trained interviewers, and I mentored other Googlers. And now that I'm back in Norway and no longer at Google, I mentor through Diversify. I mentor a little bit on the side, and it's all sort of career-focused job interview, CV writing, that kind of stuff. So that's why I'm here today. All right. What I hope that you're going to come away with from today. First of all, hopefully you'll get a good idea of what a job interview is actually meant for. Hopefully you'll get a good idea of what interviewers are kind of really looking for when they ask these questions that kind of feel like grillings sometimes. And we'll also go into a little bit about how Norwegians do job interviews, right? Which is quite relevant. And we'll have a little bit of a cultural spin on it. And all of this to say that I hope you come away knowing how to really excel in a job interview and how to interview with confidence. Some things that we're not going to touch on today, not because it's unimportant, but because we have roughly 2 hours and there's a lot to go through. I do get a lot of these questions when I mentor people, and it's a lot about the specific structure of interviews. What comes first? What comes second? What do I do if 3 people interview me versus 1? What do I answer to these specific questions? I get that quite a lot. And for the next half hour or so, we'll go through kind of the underlying purpose of job interview questions, so that we don't have to deal with how do I answer this one specific one, and let's practice that. And of course, these can be important, but again, we focus on what I've found to be the most important. But I want to hear from you who have joined this session for a quick second. What do you want to come away with from today? What's important for you for today? Feel free to unmute and share your view.
Hey, hello. Good afternoon. My name is Christoph. I'm dialing in from Belgium, where I'm currently based as a business developer, and I'm looking to move to Oslo in the nearby future. So obviously, I was very much interested in following this particular session because I would like to know more about Norwegian style of job interviews. Now, what is important? Maybe there are some cultural differences in work ethics, or maybe certain qualities that interviewers might be looking for. So I'm just all ears to hear any kind of tips about how to make a good impression on yeah, like Norwegians in general.
Yeah, great. I think you're going to really like part 2. One or two
Yeah.
more, maybe?
Yeah. I see Axe has their, yeah.
Yeah, my sound quality is bad. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, I'm outside, but I really would like what I was hoping for is to get some like answers to the main challenge I have when it comes to interviews, and this is about lack of experience in Norway, and how to overcome these challenging questions when you're asked like, are you familiar with this or that, how it works in Norway? Because I haven't been long here enough to know that.
All right,
Thanks.
perfect. Thank you for sharing. Let's jump right into what we're going to be looking at for the next 2 hours or so, or 1 hour 45 at this point. We're going to go through, first of all, why do we interview? What's the purpose of a job interview? This might sound obvious, but it's a tool for us to kind of go a little bit deeper. Part 2 will be about interview culture in Norway, just like Christoph touched on. There are some cultural things that are worth considering when you do a job interview in Norway. Part 3 is the fun part. That's when you get your turn to practice job interview questions, and it's much more fun than it sounds, I hope. And part 4, you get to ask me all the questions that are on your mind. Cool. Before we kick off, anything else from you, Miguel, or should I take the show on the road?
I think we're ready for the show. Oh, I think Alex also raised their hand again, or was it just?
No, it's
Okay, it was just stay done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry,
No,
it's very unpractical with the strollers and everything.
It's fine. Yeah, because let's get the show started. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Why do we interview? Obvious question, right? Some company has a job opening and you need a paycheck, and that's as easy as it is, right? Not quite, although if only it was that simple. Of course, interviewing, sort of like a date, less romance, more kind of nervousness maybe on at least one part, which is the interviewee. But it's all about getting to know each other. And more in a kind of professional setting than a personal setting. But I emphasize each other here because don't forget that although they are interviewing you, you are also interviewing them, kind of trying to gauge the culture of the place. If you're going to fit, if you have a hiring manager who's doing the interview, if you're going to fit with them as a manager and managee kind of dynamic, right? So it's a bit of a kind of conversation between two parties to figure out, do we actually fit together? Less in a kind of, do you want to have kids and move to a farm in the country kind of way, but more in a, what are you looking to develop? What's your skill set? How do you fit into our company culture? And like on a date, it's good to kind of show interest, have an open body language, greet people nicely, dress properly, etc. But like mentioned, that's not the main part. The main part is that they want to see the core of your professional self. They want to figure out, okay, what are you really like as a human being? So what's with all the questions, man? It's the same thing as a first date. People ask you questions, hopefully in a less kind of tense manner than in a job interview. But it's about trying to figure out who you really are. Trying to figure out who someone really is quite difficult, right? And as such, interview questions can be quite intimidating. Sometimes you can get a question and instinctively think, how on earth am I going to be able to answer that? So we go one step beyond in this case. We ask, okay, what are these questions actually designed to do? What is the person or the people on the other side of the table actually trying to get out of me? Because interview questions to a large extent are what's called meta questions. They're meant to uncover information that is not outright being asked for. And as you might have come across, this usually comes in two forms. It's situational questions, which is based on your experience. Can you tell me about a time when you had to resolve a conflict between two team members, or you had a client who was deeply dissatisfied? How did you solve that, right? The other version is hypothetical, which is stuff like imagine, or how would you, or imagine that you. Imagine that you're leading a team that's facing a significant challenge, right? All of these tend to be quite broad in scope. So we'll go in and see kind of how they work. To take a real life example from my days at Google, they had some rather infamous interview questions, especially back in the day. For example, one that was asked to a friend of mine: how many tennis balls can you fit inside a London bus? 1,235,204 tennis balls. Cool. Question answered, right? You happen to Google that before you went in to the interview, or you happen to be working at a tennis ball factory and that was a thing you knew. Would that initial answer satisfy an interviewer? No, of course not. Does Google fill London buses with tennis balls? No. Do they care that you prepared enough to Google it before you went into the interview? Not at all. So what are they actually looking for, right? They're looking for problem-solving skills. How do you assess an unsolvable problem? How do you prioritize your solution thinking, for example? My friend, to take this concrete example, he asked questions back right away. He said, oh, cool, inside a bus, does that mean I can take out the engine block? Is that counted as inside the bus? Does the exhaust pipe count? Etc., etc., etc. And he turned it into a bit of a conversation between the interviewer and himself in terms of trying to solve this problem, setting parameters for the task that he was given, and then ended up at a number that I can absolutely guarantee was nowhere near 1.2 million tennis balls. And of course, you know, Google asks this way because it would be way less effective to ask, oh, welcome to the interview. How good is your problem solving skills? And my friend would say, yeah, they're very good. Thanks for asking. Next question. So knowing kind of what an interviewer is actually looking for when they ask you questions, that's the key. Then we go to kind of tennis balls versus problem solving, right? You can kind of gauge the purpose and the intent of the question before you start answering. And this also goes for sort of, let's say, more role related or quote unquote normal interview questions, right? Let's say you've applied for a sales job. Very common question is, how would you work to develop your pipeline in the next 3, 6, and 9 months? Of course, you're at an interview, right? So you haven't actually had the job yet. You don't know what the job is supposed to be like on a day-to-day basis. So your answer on how you're going to do it in the first 3, 6, and 9 months is probably going to be quite off the mark. So what are they looking for here? They're looking to see how you approach a sales-focused role, what your thoughts are around how to build a pipeline, and of course, a great chance to ask questions. Do I have certain clients that are VIP clients more important than others? How long is my onboarding period? When do I get targets? All of these kind of things would kind of set the parameter for the question and let you kind of develop a conversation together with the interviewer rather than you just go, yeah, in 3 months, I would sell a little. In 6 months, twice of that. And in 9 months, I'll be promoted. So now that we kind of know how to answer these questions, sort of, let's see what the interviewer really is looking for, right? How do we answer these questions in the best possible way? Now, one caveat, of course, is that this could be a full-on course in itself. We're basically doing a very, very short run-through. We're scratching the surface of something that you can run individual workshops on for hours. But as a kind of good start, and hopefully this would be useful in the recording you'll get as well, is some tactics and some strategies in order to best kind of answer these things. I've mentioned this a couple of times already. Ask questions back. It's a super way to build rapport. It demonstrates engagement with the people that you're talking to, the people who are interviewing you. From a confidence perspective, it often turns it more into a level conversation rather than a kind of grilling from a senior or from a panel if you're being interviewed by multiple people. It also shows your problem-solving skills. Asking a question in and by itself is usually a really, really good sign for an interviewer. On the flip side, when I had candidates who asked no questions, that was usually a bit of a red flag. It also showcases your knowledge of the industry or the job or the company if you manage to ask quite in-depth and quite specific questions, right? And for your own benefit, when you get these super broad questions, it sets parameters for the scenario, which also makes sure that you don't go down the wrong route. You don't start answering in a way that the interviewer maybe didn't intend the question to address, right? The second one, be brief, but be open to expand. Interview questions are usually supposed to be quite, or interview answers rather, are usually supposed to be quite succinct, quite short. If you go on and on and on in your answer, that usually doesn't count for anything good. So being brief but open to expand demonstrates your conciseness. It saves a bit of time. It provides a little bit of flexibility. And of course, the open to expand part could be, I was asked when I interviewed for Google, you're rolling out Google Shopping in North Africa. Go. How do you do that? You could probably talk for a day just about the go-to-market strategy or market research or whatever else. But a good way to answer that in hindsight on my part is to kind of say, okay, there are 8 main things I would focus on. We don't have time to go through them all in this interview. They are go-to-market, market research, buying habits, etc., etc. I'm going to address what I think is the 2 most important ones. But if you have questions about the ones I don't address, feel free to ask me, right? That way you show that you've thought about it, you have something on it, but you also kind of respect their time and the fact that they probably have a bunch of questions to go through. Also, the one in brackets there, the last one, don't do their work for free. That's more related to kind of when you're asked to present a case. A lot of companies, unfortunately, get a lot of free work out of people where they say, oh yeah, we're designing a marketing strategy for this product. Go and design a marketing strategy and come back to us and pitch it. Okay, they can lift your marketing strategy straight from you. They can even use it. You have done all their work for free. Bad for you, good for them. For those specific examples, you can say the same thing applies, right? You can say, okay, I've gotten to the end here. This is my product. There's a lot of work that is kind of underpinning my conclusion. If you have any questions about that, ask. Don't go through kind of step by step. If they say we want to roll out into 7 countries, you can say, okay, I did in-depth work for 2 that I'm going to present. I've done all 7, but if you want to know more about the 5 I don't present, just ask. Third one, kind of linked to be brief. Don't overdo it. Don't get lost in your own answers. That happens surprisingly often. People start on a train of thought. They don't have necessarily a script in front of them, of course, because it's a job interview, and they just keep on going, and sometimes going into like excruciating detail. As I mentioned, be comfortable omitting things and tell the interviewer specifically what you haven't addressed, right? Be clear that, okay, this answer for me intuitively has, let's say, 5 components. I should be doing 30 seconds per component, and then ask whether there's anything else they want to know. Have a little mental note that although there is a lot to be said, don't overdo it. This especially goes if you're an expert in your field. In my experience, the deeper the knowledge, the more people can sit and talk your ear off. Third one, I know Sammen om en jobb also has a specific session on the STAR method, but I thought I'd mention it because it really is absolutely golden. If this is old news for all of you, apologies for the repetition. But STAR basically stands for situation, task, action, and result. It is a great framework for for structuring your answers when it comes to these very open-ended, very kind of general, non-specific questions. It makes your answers a little bit more clear, concise, and impactful. Of course, one thing that's super important, especially in cultures like Norwegian cultures, where it's a lot of like, we don't want to take credit. We have something called janteloven. So we tend to talk a lot in we. My team had the situation where there was a marketing campaign that we had to execute. And so we went out and blah, 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 blah. A very common pitfall. Focus on your own role. If I, as an interviewer, hear you describe a whole situation, task, action, and results as per the STAR method, but you focused on the plural, the we did, I still have no idea what your role was in this. So avoid this common caveat and focus on what you had done in this situation, right? One of the key takeaways of this session, when you know the core purpose of all of these questions, it lets you have a two-way conversation. Much, much easier to talk to someone about whether you would fit in the company, whether you would be good in a job, whether you would be performing well potentially, when you can have a two-way conversation. Ask questions, dig in what they would actually like to know about you, right? Really kind of set parameters for what they're trying to figure out. And to give you a little bit of a kind of peek behind the curtain, to give you a little bit of an idea of what's potentially in the interviewer's head, right? I've taken a few things that we used to do at Google when we had to fill in interview feedback. So we would do an interview, we'd take copious notes, and then we'd go back and fill out on this portal a whole bunch of information. These were 6 of the boxes that we had to fill in. I picked kind of a good selection. Leadership is leadership. Googliness is kind of a vague set of values or principles or whatever you want to call it that Google kind of aims to embody in everything it does. And to kind of illustrate a sort of perceived disconnect between the surface of the question and the answer that an interviewer might be looking for, let's take an example of a very popular question that we used to do. You get 2 emails sent to you at exactly the same minute from 2 clients, both addressing an urgent request. What do you do? Okay, I don't actually care that much what you do in terms of, I sit down and then I open my computer, put my headphones on, make sure nobody distracts me. I want to see how you manage tasks, how you balance competing requirements against each other, whether you put the user first, so that I can put some meaningful interview notes into these boxes. Oh yeah, the candidate is great, managing task, focused initially on the revenue impact of the one request above the other, but we saw that there was a brand risk for the one, which then trumped, etc., etc., etc. Nothing in these boxes point to tennis balls or buses or fitting tennis balls in buses. So that's important to remember. When it comes to these kind of guidelines, there are always exceptions, right? Some questions should be taken at face value because they're looking for exactly what it is they're asking you. Tell me about yourself. Nothing more to it. They want to know about you. Basically what they're asking, and there's versions of this, right? Talk me through your CV, etc., etc. It's an elevator pitch about yourself. Usually the first question. So it's a great way to set your first impression. You really have to make sure that you nail this. This is your chance to spend 2 minutes to kind of highlight what you want your interviewers to know, what you want to emphasize from your career, from your education, from your experience. And as with, general interview answers, keep it short and sweet. This is another area where a lot of candidates tend to get very, very lost, where they start with, I was born on a winter's night in 1993. The birds were singing in the trees. Keep it short and sweet, keep it relevant. And another common pitfall, nail the ending. A lot of people go through up until the job that they have at the moment, and they kind of fizzle out with, so anyway, now I lead a team of marketing professionals, and yeah, that's kind of what I do now, or well, I kind of I do that now. Awkward silence. Make sure that you practice this, because it is an elevator pitch. You're pitching yourself. Make sure you practice this, including the ending. Why should we hire you? I think this is a terrible interview question, but that aside, think of this as a condensed cover letter. Essentially, what they want is kind of a run through of what you should put in a cover letter. Highlight your achievements, and if you research the company, you're fit with the role, or you're fit with the company culture. And it's also a great place to show some self-awareness if that's something that suits the mood. Not sit and say, you should hire me because I am the best you'll ever get, and other people are not as great as me. It can also show that you've researched the company if you come in and say, I was really impressed with your commitment to DEIB. And that's something that resonates really closely with me. So for me, it's important to have an employer that respects the DEIB space. So that's why I think we would be a really great culture fit. Third one, role-related question. They are quite often also situational or hypothetical, but they're often more specific. What would you do if a client called you up that you have in your portfolio and told you that he's very unhappy with the performance of your work over the last 2 quarters? They point more to kind of what you would be expected to exhibit in the role in terms of skill sets and in terms of abilities. So they can be taken a little bit more at face value. However, because they also tend to be slightly open-ended, they are an opportunity to kind of segue into wider topics of, in the example of a dissatisfied client, putting the user first and saying, okay, we need to really listen to this guy. We need to hear what the issue is, etc. Last one, any questions? Usually at the end of a job interview, you get a question. If you have any questions, the worst possible answer you can give to this is, no, I don't. This really is your chance to shine and show that you've researched the company, you've researched the role. You can clarify things that you feel like you need to know. And of course, there are kind of good and bad questions. Keep to the allotted time. We'll get to the point of that slightly later when we touch on the Norwegian way of doing interviews. But of course, good questions would be something like, what are the key performance indicators for success in this role, right? Showing that you're really kind of looked into how you're going to be assessed, what your success is going to be measured by. You're really kind of chomping at the bit, ready to go. Or can you tell me more about the opportunities for development within your company? How easy is it to get promoted? Okay, cool. You know that you're not going to stagnate if they give you a good answer, that is. And the interviewer sees that you have kind of drive and ambition. 2 examples of not so good questions that I've gotten myself. Is it possible to leave at 2 p.m. on Fridays? And for Google, do I get any free stuff? You do get a lot of free stuff, but really not the time or place to ask. And that's a nice segue into my next question. Any questions before we move on to part 2?
Hi, this is Ashwini Barge. I hope, am I audible? Okay, yeah, thanks a lot. With respect to your previous slide, uh, I mean, all the 4 parameters, all the 4 sections are well explained. But I mean, if you allow us, can we just demonstrate how we can do the tell me about yourself? Because I'm a bit confused between the last nail the ending. How we can do that, nail the ending? I mean, with respect to the example, it would be easy for us to get the actual way of interview? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So nail the ending basically just means have an elevator pitch prepared so that you know what to answer when somebody says, "Tell me about yourself." This doesn't only apply in an interview setting, right? Let's say that you're at a conference, a trade conference for your particular business, and somebody says, "Oh, Ashwini, nice to meet you. My name is John. What do you do?" Or "Who are you?" Or why are you at this conference? Having a kind of go-to little 20-second blurb of who am I, how do I want to be perceived, how do I present myself, and what do I want to put across is super, super useful. The nail the ending part comes with practice. If you prep for a tell me about yourself elevator pitch, usually you'll have a read through or 2 or 3 where you'll find that you just kind of end up drifting away at the end. So what I actually recommend, and I'm going to keep this super short because we're short on time, and this could be kind of a workshop in itself. But what I usually do is I recommend that you write down a mini biography of who you are and what you want to emphasize in your education or career or experience, or all 3 together if it's relevant. Read it out, see that it takes 5-6 minutes, realize that nobody wants to be talked at for 5 or 6 minutes, and then shorten it, right? Try to get it down to half a minute-ish. And then through that process, through kind of iteration and doing that mental thinking of, okay, what's important that I put across? What are my key qualifications, the things that I'm proud of, the things that I want to share? Quite naturally, you'll end up also getting to a point where, okay, this is what I want to leave them with as the last impression of who I am, i.e. the ending. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, perfectly. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Cool. Anyone else? Brilliant. We will go on to part 2.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Do we consider the volunteering work as an experience as well? Like you can tell them about something, some challenging that you manage with the social context or something. Can we mention something like that?
Absolutely. And that's a really good question, actually, because it touches on an overarching question of how specific should you be when you answer these kind of broad questions. I should have probably put this in a slide, but it's very, very common if you're good at interviews to kind of segue the question into something that you want to talk about, if that makes sense. If you get a question where you're like, okay, you're asking about a thing, but I have this experience that doesn't quite fit. Can I answer with that? That just shows kind of positively. And as well, showing volunteering work or anything that's kind of extracurricular, super, super good. As long as it's something that goes beyond the question itself and emphasizes something that you think that they're looking for, it's a super, super good tactic.
Okay, thank you.
Let's go into part 2. Interviewing in Norway. Scary stuff, huh? So I started this section because through kind of my mentoring, I get a lot of questions that starts with versions of, in Norway, it seems that ... In Norway, it seems that everyone's super concerned about being on time. Why is that? In Norway, it seems that the boss isn't really a leader and I don't really understand their role. They come to work on a bicycle and I don't get it. In Norway, it seems that you can't brag about your achievements because you have this weird thing called janteloven. So part 2 is kind of about the cultural expectations in a job interview and cultural expectations that are sometimes subconscious. If you're having a hard time making great impressions in interviews, kind of understanding these subtle or sometimes not so subtle cultural codes can be the final push to land you the role that you want. And I should say that this section is used, I use tools here developed by someone named Erin Meyer. She works at INSEAD in Paris, one of the world's leading business schools. And she basically, in this book, explores how cultural differences affect things like communication, leadership, decision-making, etc., from kind of a business point of view. And she uses a framework of 8 dimensions to kind of compare and contrast these 8 values. And as you can see here, we're talking communicating, evaluating, leading, deciding, trusting, disagreeing, scheduling, and persuading. Makes sense, right? This is all intuitive? Great. No, I'm kidding. What does it all mean? Well, let's have a look. I'll give you a few seconds just to kind of read this, because it's a lot of text. And through this section, because we don't have that long, we'll be focusing on 3 things. We'll be focusing on communicating, leading, and scheduling. As you saw, there's been a whole book written about this, which I do recommend you to get. And Meyer, I think she does 3-day workshops on this topic, and we don't have time for that. So again, we'll be kind of scratching the surface a little bit and hopefully giving you something to chew on. To show you how it works, this is 2 country comparisons plotted on the graph or the scales. We have Netherlands to the left and Thailand to the right. Meyer has these tools that allow you to compare kind of cultural elements between individuals, between teams in a workplace, or as in this case, and as in for the rest of today, countries. Now, one important thing to keep in mind for the rest of part 2, it's all relative. It's relative to each other. A Frenchman might seem super unstructured, chaotic, and disorganized to someone who's British, while a French person might have the same exact complaint about an Indian colleague, for example. And this is an example that Meyer has in her book from KPMG, where they had kind of this 3 nationals on a team, and it was quite interesting to see that they all had the same feedback about kind of each other in a sense, because it's all relative. We have to measure up against other cultures, not on an absolute scale. The point of this is that when we know about these kind of subtle or not so subtle differences, it's way easier to spot where misunderstandings happen, where we can maybe kind of adapt a little bit. For example, in this case with, let's say you have a Thai manager who moves to Amsterdam to manage a Dutch team, right? They would be well suited to kind of check out this graph and say, okay, maybe we have quite different styles across all of these scales that we need to kind of keep in mind when talking to each other, when managing, etc., etc. But before we continue, a few massive caveats. Talking about culture and cultural differences, and you do it this way and I do it that way because you're from there and I'm from here, can be quite a sensitive topic. It can be quite a minefield. And of course, you know, having someone on a workshop like this say, X culture is like this, it can make anyone defensive, right? So keep in mind that what we're looking at here is generalizations. And again, they're relative. When you're submerged in a culture like a fish in water in this case, right? It's quite, or it can be quite difficult to see that culture from the outside and to observe it relative to your own culture or to other cultures. Vice versa, much easier. I'm sure everyone here who has moved to Norway have at least a handful of examples of Norwegians do it this way. That's unusual to me. Norwegians put their babies out to sleep in the middle of winter for some insane reason. Seeing your own culture in the same way, much, much harder. So just keep that in mind. And also keep in mind that a lot of things won't fit with the examples that we have here. This does not touch on, for example, third culture upbringing, or being part of two cultures, or being from one culture and having lived and worked for a long time in another, for example. But hopefully this is a good idea to see, like you'll get a good starting point for analyzing your own culture or cultures relative to Norway and Norwegian culture on the topic of interviewing. And as I said, I do recommend reading the book. It's very good. So to take an illustration of how this works, on the communicating scale, you have the US on the far left, which is low context, and you have Japan on the far right, which is high context. These are the most, like the biggest outliers on their respective sides, right? US, most low context in the world. Everything needs to be written and stated, etc. Japan, way more high context. It's a lot of kind of shared culture, shared history, shared implicit understanding of what someone's trying to say. A very, very common American public speaking advice. Tell them what you're going to say it, and tell them what you said. Welcome to this workshop on how to do job interviews. Today we're going to talk about how to do job interviews, blah, 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 tips for job interviews. Well, today we've spoken about how to do job interviews. Thank you. Whereas in Japan, in 2007, word of the year was kuki yomenai, or KY, one who cannot read the air. Someone who is unaware of the subtle cultural clues and subtle little kind of hints, and who is kind of oblivious to the unspoken. Now, if someone Japanese was told, tell them what you're going to say it, and tell them what you said, they might see this as, you know, unnecessarily stating the obvious, or even as condescending or patronizing. And on the flip side, if an American person was told to read the air, potentially it might be seen as a little secretive or lacking in transparency, or worst, even untrustworthy, right? Or just simply poor communication skills on the sender's part. So those are the kind of gaps that this framework is trying to bridge. And to see how Norway maps, Norway plots like this. Might be some surprises in there for some of you, I don't know. But to start with a few examples, we're quite low context on communication, meaning that we like things to be precise, stated, short and sweet. It should be written. Let's say you have a meeting, and you have a written agenda, and you have written meeting notes sent out after. It's explicit who is supposed to do what, who has which tasks and what deadlines. However, we're not quite on the American side with the say it, and say it again mentality. We score very, very high on flat leadership, egalitarian leading, right? The guy who heads the NRC, a huge NGO in Norway, Jan Egeland, he tends to come to work on his bike, which in China, for example, is usually a sign that you're not a super important boss, and by comparison, your team is not super important. So, you know, those kind of things can be a little touchy from culture to culture. I used to be part of an exchange program in school where we had students from South Africa come to Norway. They were flabbergasted when they heard that we referred to our teacher with the first name, or in the case of one of them, we had a nickname. We just called him G, and they were super, super surprised that we were so disrespectful, right? To us, it's not disrespect, it's just, you know, egalitarianism in a sense. Of course, they call their teacher Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so. We also have consensus-driven decision-making culture, which means that, you know, your boss might ask you or ask the team for advice on something, especially coupled with the egalitarian leading part, right? And there's not really a kind of hierarchical, you do as I say because I'm your boss kind of culture. It's more of I am the team leader, so I'm going to empower my team to be good. I'm going to highlight my team's achievements, and that to me is good leadership. This is a super, super interesting topic in Meyer's book, and something that I urge you to dive into. Task-based. this is important for interviews especially. It means that we place high value on getting tasks done over kind of relationship building and going out for drinks and having long breaks in meetings and so on. A good meeting is efficient. It has an agenda. It has clear discussion points, assigned tasks, written recap after, and it ends on time, which kind of goes into the scheduling part. In some cultures, long breaks, going over time, etc., is seen as a positive thing. It's relationship building, or it's giving time and space to a really important topic, which then trumps the timing thing. In Norway, not so much. Scheduling means that we're super linear time-based, to use the phrasing from here. We like organization and structure. And if a Norwegian says to you, arrive at 2 p.m. for a job interview, for example, 2:05 is considered being late. Being late is considered very rude because it shows a lack of respect for the other person or the other people's time. And no surprise to anyone, as a nation, we definitely struggle with fashionably late as a concept. In the interest of time, we will focus on these three areas, as I mentioned: communication, leading, and scheduling. I've taken out a few examples here on how they kind of fit into an interview setting, but keep in mind again that we're only really scratching the surface, right? So there's a lot more to be said on this. Norwegian communication. Like I mentioned, we're a low context culture. We're trained from a cultural point of view to communicate as literally and as explicitly as possible. So good communication for a Norwegian is about clarity and explicitness on your side as the communicator. There's none of this reading the ear. Clear communication is up to you. Miscommunications happen when you as the communicator don't do your job properly. Connected to this, candidates are expected to provide kind of direct and honest answers. Anything that's seen as kind of vague or evasive or a little bit kind of concealed may be viewed negatively. And this is super important to keep in mind when using STAR. Be as direct as you possibly can, right? And be prepared to discuss specific examples of your work and how you specifically contributed in previous roles to whatever example that you're bringing up. We had a lady in a previous session who said, this feels unfair because it feels like I'm taking credit for my manager's work. Because in her culture, the manager of the team kind of owns the achievements of the team. Not so much here. Here it's more about what you contributed personally, specifically, and directly. Caveat, while direct, we also value modesty. So the law of Jante comes into play again. A lot of people ask me about this when it's about the pitch, the elevator pitch. Tell me about your CV. How do I highlight my own achievements without coming off as bragging? It's a difficult balance to strike. It is generally not considered appropriate to boast about your achievements, but describing them in kind of a neutral fashion is kind of the way to go. And of course, for communication, super useful to say, is there anything I can clarify? Because if you ask if you can clarify or if anything needs to be clarified, you're also giving the interviewer a chance to jump in and say, yeah, I wasn't quite certain what your role was in this specific example you gave. Or is there a reason why you talk about the achievements of your team, but don't touch on what your role was? It gives you a chance to kind of get closer to what the interviewer may be expecting from your answers. In terms of leading, we have an egalitarian leadership style, as we just saw. So it's a great idea when you think about how to answer one of these super broad questions. Highlight your ability to collaborate with others, empower your team, share decision-making, of course, share the wins, because inclusive leadership is a big part. Again, we're talking in generalizations. This might change from interview setting to interview setting, but in general, creating kind of a welcoming and inclusive environment for all your team members is something that Norwegian workplaces set very, very highly. We also touched on participative leadership. which is kind of centered around demonstrating how you involve other people in your decision making and problem solving, how you maybe checked with a wider set of stakeholders before executing a big thing, how you sought advice, and importantly, and something that comes up recurrently, Norwegians rarely expect their manager or their boss to decide things for them. Very rarely will you be in a workplace where you get delegated tasks by your boss and they say, okay, do this X, Y, and Z, just execute. That's usually not how things work. It's more about you get a vague problem to fix or a wide kind of mandate, and it's up to you to figure out how to do it. This can also cause a huge amount of frustration and uncertainty. So it's one of the kind of key things when it comes to cultural leadership, right? Caveat, your boss, although egalitarian, is still your boss. So it might not be super clever to rock up in their office, throw your legs on their desk, and call them by a nickname that you just made up. If in doubt, always kind of side on the more kind of respectful and hierarchical side of things. One thing for interviews specifically, showing excessive deference to an interviewer can actually be perceived negatively when we're this far out on the egalitarian side of the leading scale. So try to your most comfortable point to treat an interview as a conversation among equals. Telling people or telling an interviewer what you think they might want to hear in terms of just agreeing with everything they say or points that they bring up might work against you. And I've seen examples of this happening, and it's unfortunate because again, it's not about we're not really getting to the core of you as a professional person if it's all a kind of idea of, oh yeah, I'm telling them what I think they want to hear. Last but not least, Norwegian scheduling. Everyone who has been in Norway for more than 2 days might have experience with this. We are highly punctual. Arrive on time or even slightly early for interviews, just to make sure, because keeping time in Norway is the same as showing respect to the person or people that you're meeting. Deadlines and schedules are generally taken very seriously. So if you're asked to prepare cases, for example, be prepared to meet the deadlines. And if anything happens, you should communicate to them. Stick to the time for time box scenarios. You have 10 minutes to present your case. Stick to 10 minutes. 11 minutes is overtime and counts negatively. Hey, you have, thank you for the interview. Now you have 5 minutes to ask any questions you might have. Stick to 5 minutes. We highly value efficiency and effective time management, so be prepared to demonstrate that. Demonstrate your ability to prioritize tasks, meet deadlines, structure your work, etc., etc. And it's always good to be specific. Having specific examples to illustrate your point, as in, I managed a sales team of 5 with a $14 million portfolio, rather than I was a sales team manager. Welcome to a crash course in Norwegian business mentality. Time to put theory into practice. Miguel, I do believe that you're taking over at this point, are you?